Hey, welcome to our 60th webinar. And today I'm with Bill McAllister Lovett, and we're going to be talking about engaging high performing colleagues translated into your big pick. And we've got a particular approach to this. First, some domestics. If you're watching the recording of this, what I'm going to do, I'm going to be referring to some props as we go through. You'll see me sharing the screen. And what I want you to be able to do if you're watching the recording is to be able to play along as well. So I'm going to leave the Jamboard link as active as I can. And if it isn't for whatever reason, please ping me because I do want you to go on and try it out. I'll also keep the board open and I'll be able to share that with you if you want to drop me your email, mart@yourBigPick, and I will share with you. So everything you see today, you can collaborate on at a later date. This is a series of webinars we've had. We've had two previous webinars focusing on performance, the first of which looked at the foundations of performance. That means instead of instilling fear and anxiety when that email arrives for performance review chat, you actually receive something that engages and delights and makes you want to get involved and tell your story. We call that the foundation step. If you go to yourbigpick.com/performance/story, you'll see that first prop that we use in terms of that foundation step. The second webinar then we moved on to was around what then goes on in the room for the colleague, for the employee. We call this the journeyman. They're on a journey. We're all on a journey. We all have a story to tell. So it was all about what we stop or what the colleague wants to stop doing, what they want to start doing in terms of something new, and what they want to try out and be quite innovative about. So that prop, that particular step of the journey was about, for all employees, giving them the chance to reflect on what to start, what to stop, what to start doing new in terms of innovation. So that was that one. We ran that and it went really well. Lots of people added post-its to the board. We give a little prop out for people to tell their story. And then we got on to this third chapter. And when I was preparing for this, our performance lead, Tunch Tully, gave me a bit of a story about this guy called Mike in the organization who, he was doing all the right stuff. He was clearing all of his objectives. He was doing all the work that was expected of him. And yet Mike was disgruntled. He was about to hand in his notice. He wasn't being recognized. And the story goes in Mike's case that because he was doing all of the right things and he was in kind of parameters of performance between medium and high and beyond at various times, he wasn't getting recognized because there wasn't an outlet for him to tell his story. So we thought we would add this being your best self, stretch objectives for particular high performing colleagues. And there's this kind of question around, should we have this open to everybody? Because everybody can be at different times a high performing colleague. And that's probably the case. But we have this specific prop that I'm going to be referring to in the practical exercise, which actually adds a dimension to this story. And what we're going to be doing with Bill's help is codifying this high performing colleague conversation with a particular aspect that takes us into a breakdown of what high performance means translated using big picture. And we have a view on that. There'll always be different ways to do it. We're not saying this is the only way, but it is a way that we have an hypothesis that we're continually testing. Years of experience in this field with Tunch and others using big picture to actually bring this high performance story to the fore and actually provide some practical props to do that. So that's what we're going to be doing. We're going to be going through a bit of a practical exercise, talking through what that story prop is, also then how it relates onto the big picture board. I'm really lucky today to have Bill working with me around high performance. So over to you, Bill, for your take on anything I might have said in this session or previous, just about high performance and what it means to you.
So basically, one of the fundamental questions is, how do I engage with a high-performing person or team? And if you take it back a step, what do I mean by a high-performance person and team? how do I measure that performance? And if I'm not in a high performing team, am I jealous? How do I get into a high performing team? You've just said the thing about Mike. Mike was not recognized for being high performing because there were no parameters in there to say, Mike, you're doing really well. When actually Mike's measurement was probably different for the measures he wanted to be attributed to. So there's a whole mismatch there with Mike, you're doing really well, but we can't say you're high performing because we don't know what it looks like.
And Bill, on that point of measuring good, as I often call it, so what good looks like, without giving the game away as to where we're going to go with this, because I'm a bit biased on this, I'm going to try and ask the question without predicating the answer. What's the most powerful way of measuring high performance? If there was one way to measure it, is it more to do with that individual, or is it more to do with the organizational context? Or is it purely down to that colleague's interpretation of what it means for them? Like, how far can we go to define what the best measurement is for high performance?
So basically, am I a high performing individual because I work and you've given me a certain task to do, and the outcome was you've ticked the box and you've done it. If you're in the team, have the team delivered to something you've already defined? By the way, go away team and deliver this. And if you deliver it and tick all the boxes, then you're a high performing team. And then if you have all these teams are performing highly, is that organization then a high performing organization? So on one level, it's linear, but as you know, this goes up and down. That you've got peaks and troughs along these lines that you'll say, I've hit the top of the mountain. Now, where do I go? I've got to the top of the mountain. I've done it. Can I come back down then? And what are you going to do differently to get me back up to the top again? So the analogy could be, do I go and build another base camp to build another high performing team? Because they've gone up their own base, they've gone from the base camp up to the top. You've put the structure in place to allow them to get there. They've got there, then they come back down and say, right, do we build a new base camp or do we just go somewhere else?
So does everybody's level then, right? You're looking to take, I think, everyone with you. By using the base camp metaphor, you're using the fact everyone's got to go with you. So there's less advantage having an outlier of high performing individuals. I notice you're using the team reference more than individuals. So whilst the title on this session is Engaging High Performing Colleagues, actually it's when you group them into teams where that comes alive, you take it into a wider context of just the colleague.
Yeah, because then the whole thing about collaboration and co-creation, if you're all coming from the same value and behavior system, then you'll allow people to get up that climbing. So the I and the we are very, very important. But at the same time, you could have two base camps running in parallel. Would they be competing against each other to get to the top of the mountain, if you use that metaphor?
Yeah.
And what steps would each base camp do in order to do that?
We as humans love telling stories, particularly stories that we've been involved in and are about ourselves. So what we do via this prop, whoever it is, and all 3 pages of the prop work in the same way, whether it's Foundations, Journeyman, and Mastery, this best self, this final chapter. Now, what we say is we give this as a prompt, so you can see there's a journey coming through. So I'm just going to annotate this as I go. I'll use the yellow pen to annotate. So we start up here. I'm going to stop doing something. I'm going to try something new, and I'm going to focus on. So this can start before the conversation. This gets any colleague talking about their own story. We think that is more compelling than sending out questionnaire wherever. It gets the colleague talking. Now, the difference on this one, there's a different emphasis. Because of that, my goal or my aim is to do X, and people would fill this in for themselves. So what they're doing is personalizing their own aim and objective, and with the measure symbol being here, they are introducing a measure, or they're encouraged to suggest a measure that means success to them. Now, that's one of the steps, but you said a few minutes ago, Bill, it was about the I and the we. So what we immediately go on to here is, because of that, in Pixar storytelling mode, because of that personal individual objective, that thing there to the left, we will again achieve something. So I'm going to give an example. I've put it on there as a bit of a post-it, and this is the board that's open if you want to play along. If you're watching the recording, I'll post a link under it and leave the Jamboard open for as long as I can. So this one here could be, because of what I'm going to stop or try something new or focus on, I'm going to achieve my own targets. So if we go into the organizational context in a moment, it's going to be about use of leisure time. So if I'm worked in the marketing space, my own target might be to raise levels of awareness for our facility online and in the physical sense with our target demographic. That could be my personal objective. I might take great pride, and I may consider myself high performing because I smash those targets better than anyone else. And the point I'm making is that only works for me for high performance in its true sense when you combine that with the organizational context, which is this next box, which is to ensure that the organization and its that is successful. And the point is here, it only works then in combination. So my hypothesis here is you can only be considered in any sense high performing in an organizational context if both you have a self-awareness of your own personal individual objective, the I, but also the organizational objective and how that fits. And that awareness is essential for you to be high performing in the definition that I would like to stand against and represent. How does that sound to you, Bill?
That sounds great. Now I'm going to ask you a question here. You're saying, so the organization is sure it's successful, right? So if you've got unsuccessful, high-performing individuals, would achieving that target allow you to say the organization is successful then? That's almost reverse psychology. The we is coming over the I. So the organization knows what to do from a high-performing organization. But if this individual's not doing it, how would you do that?
So this is very interesting. So when we go between one and the other, I think this one is per individual and team. This is bottom up, this one here. And this is then defined differently. This measure that exists in here is top down. So this is an organizational measure of success, a measure of success that might talk to, let's say, a shareholder or a director, someone at the top of the shop. I think we need to be realistic in terms of having a healthy tension, as I call it, between individual measures and objectives to the left in this box 4, as we call it, and the top-down organizational context of success. So they both have to coexist. So although the word performing appears in both, there are two types of performing. There's performing at the individual and team level, bottom up, and performing in the organizational context. And I think recognizing that allows us to have more effective conversations because we're recognizing there are different needs at play here, and just choosing one doesn't tell the whole story. So I think in answer to your question, Bill, maybe controversially, there is a sequence of logic that the organizational performance can be achieved even though you have suboptimal performance by any individual or team in the context. It's just, it's unfortunate. It's not ideal. And ideally, you would have a full set of individuals who are performing, a full set of teams, and therefore there will be a correlation between successful organization. You would just expect that to be one of the scenarios. It's like ticks all across the board. I do think there's got to be organizations who are high performing and successful, but realistically within it, there are pockets of different levels of performance. I think that's just reality. If that's a fair answer, it might not suit everybody, but that's my answer.
So what's interesting, if I do the base camp in the mountain,
Mm-hmm.
the organization wants to get to the top of the mountain. So we're equipping you at the base camp with the tools to allow you to ascend to the top. And what you said, some people will not get to the top, even though at that moment in time, you've given them the toolkit to get to the top of the mountain.
Yeah.
And then that'll come around to the soup. Yeah.
Yeah. And on that point, Bill, that toolkit, the way you've expressed it there, we see this toolkit by asking everybody in the organization and allowing and encourage them to have their own story and their voice. That is partly equipping them, because equipping them is giving them an outlet and a way to tell their story. We think there'll obviously be need for other stuff, but that's how we're going to start. And this is the first exercise in terms of getting everybody telling their story, featuring the measure symbol, the challenge symbol, the opportunity symbol. Now, there's something about suggestion here that I really like. Not only are we using the Pixar storytelling technique to get the story going, i.e. once upon a time I did this, but then one day this happened because of that, and so now, that's that kind of general format which we've adapted. We've also suggested adding in the symbols, and there's a reason we want to weave in the big picture symbols on this prop. And if I flick to the next one, we're just going to go now into the organizational context. So we're at the point in the sequence where an individual, in whatever form of performance we want to make, has had the chance to tell their story, consider things from their own perspective, but also from the organization perspective. Now, some colleagues, that second one might not work so well, because they might say, well, what's in it for me? It's like, why should I be really bothered? So I think some colleagues don't make that connection with, I just want my salary, but I don't really feel part of a cog in that organizational wheel. But this is where we want to push the boundaries about, you may not layer this in at the beginning, but there will be a point in a conversation where you're not just interested in their point of perspective. You want to see how they see themselves in the organizational context. And I think that's an entirely positive thing. Now, when you've done that, if I flick to here, we go to our big picture board. And this is where the story then flips into an organizational perspective. And I think Brain doesn't mind this. I think Brain goes, actually, you've asked me to tell my story. I've really enjoyed doing that. I've introduced some of my symbols that you've asked me to. So I've talked about measure, money, process, maybe come into it, but mostly challenge and opportunity and measure. And then you go to the big picture as the ground truth, the single version of the truth. And this is where you would then have a different organizational context. So, for instance, Bill, you're down there in management and you've got a point of perspective, and I've given you a my measure and a we measure. And this is reflecting the storytelling. So the idea is here, we bring over and translate what came out of the stories. I don't know, from your point of perspective, I put you in management, Bill, it could be administration. But for this type of company, a kind of a leisure experience, there's a my and a we here. How would those two maybe differ? What could be a my measure?
My measure would be, so basically we're at base camp and you've given me a rucksack. So you think from an individual perspective, I have all the toolkit in my rucksack to become a high performing person. At some point, you're going to empty that because some of those tools aren't works. Then you have to have the conversation with the we. What can you add to my toolkit to allow me to perform? Because you've given everybody the same rucksack to get up to base camp, but there'll be bits in the toolkit that may or may not work for you. And the we needs to recognize we have to change this guy's toolkit to get him up there.
Yeah. And that we measure, has that gone fully for the organizational perspective? Could a director or someone at the top of the shop collect those we measures of organizational success and collect them together? Or are they still more personalized? How easy is it, do we think, to ask every colleague to give us the organizational measure, the we measure, determines success for the organization? Do you think it's fair to ask all colleagues for that as being part of the corporate ecosystem? Or do you think we should stay with the individual for longer and not go for that full organizational way? Because for me, that organizational way measure here might be something that actually I want to do something in management that means we get more returning customers into our facility. That to me is a genuine organizational we measure. I'm suggesting taking it that far, and it's how, whether that's encouraged, whether that's well received by colleagues, I think that's part of the definition of high performing. They see themselves in the context of an organizational measure.
Yes, because you've actually said you've gone to a different place now with the we. If you're not all umbrellaing the we, but putting it in such a way that this is going to affect you we, but individually, we know you can deliver things in a different way. And there's a two-way process here. You know, you talked about the tension earlier on.
Yeah.
There's going to be tension between the I and the we. My God, you want to deliver this. Therefore, you have to give me something in here to allow me to fulfill what you want me to fulfill. So the we, the whole encompassing we, yes, we want to get there. Individually, do I need something to get me up to the we to make me to full perform there? That could be a training perspective. That could be an operational perspective. How do I get more customers? Well, do you know what a customer is? The opportunity is there's another training opportunity in there. We're actually
in which case we would tag that in. And what I really like about this approach and what's happened is, and I moved myself over into customer care to acknowledge, if you're going to offer a view for management on an organizational performance measure that is not in your area, and we don't want to encourage you to just think about your area. We want you to think about the organizational context. Once you take that out of your area and plonk it in a different part of the organization, systems thinking and human nature kicks in and suggests that if I'm in customer care and you're making assumptions and putting some expectation on things that are happening on customer care, we need to be talking. Those two cogs in that organization need to be talking. I think there's too much like fire and forget with this kind of stuff. Like it's over there or it's so far in the future. We don't need to worry about it. What we're doing is bringing these natural connections together at the point of source via a conversation, and we're drawing people into that conversation via the earlier story where they could tell their own story. But once that then breaks out into the organizational context on big picture, then you are then encouraged pointed towards a conversation that you have to get involved with, because there's wider considerations to be had. And I think this is where sharing useful truths and where organizations, in terms of high performing colleagues and the definition of a high performing colleague, needs to be operating in an organizational context, but we get there via their personal story. And that's the practicality of what we're putting forward as this. So Mike earlier in this conversation, where he was achieving and excelling at what he was doing, he would be given the more of an overall view as part of a bigger conversation to actually express and demonstrate the value he was undoubtedly bringing. It just wasn't being recognized. And I think this is a platform and an outlet for people like Mike to get that story out. And I don't think it has to take an overly long time. I think they just need the elegant and straightforward practical tools to achieve that. And that's what we're offering.
So wouldn't it be interesting, and I'm not sure what area Mike worked in, to what you did with the management and admin to take into customer care, if you did that in parallel, say, we're going to put this person in because we know we can achieve that. And in a way that could almost be a really good best practice model. We've done this for this person. We've recognized what they do. We're now going to put them in this, but we've given them the toolkit to take with them to do it. And that's the bit that's missing. There's a bit missing from your toolkit in order to do it, but we trust you to do this. And the opportunity for the whole look what we've done. We've trusted this person to do this. That could be a whole completely re-engagement.
And I think in that scenario, it is always more powerful for Mike to realize and be given a chance to voice that and be an active part rather than having it done to him. He's actually being given a part in the conversation. Because back to the earlier plot, the ability to ask colleagues for their own story is something that is a great leveler and something everybody likes to talk about. And I think that delight and surprise when an employee is asked for that is the great place to start. You're drawing people in this case, Mike, into that conversation. Then his story is sprouting out across the organization in terms of how his excellent work is now being recognized at an organizational level. And if the organizational measures are chosen correctly, it will show that Mike is having more influence over those organizational success measures than other people in the organization. Not in a, look at Mike, this is great, Mike, and everyone else isn't as good as you, but watch what Mike does, watch how Mike is doing this, and therefore, should we be emulating or creating the conditions to replicate Mike's? And the more Mikes you have in an organization who are excelling and being recognized for that because they're contributing to organizational measures, then that's got to drive high performance people, teams, and organizations. And I think that's the game that we're in with this structure that we've got, all based on storytelling.
So basically, it's like, do you know any other Mikes in the organization? And wouldn't you want to set up a Mike mentoring team? Because you've recognized that. That's a wonderful thing. And then come and bring me the conversations about, oh, I recognize what Mike's doing. Is there any chance I could be involved?
Yeah, that's wonderful. I love that kind of emulation of something good. So it's not seen as like tall poppy, let's knock Mike down. Let's actually emulate Mike because he's demonstrated his ability to influence a successful organization. So I think that brings to the end, the kind of the demonstration element with big picture. A lot of the time it's based on good values, but we also always like to offer practical tools and ways of doing it. So we don't just talk about it. We can actually run sessions with these tools, whether it's the story prop or the big picture board, and it can be done either physically, as you can see behind me on the wall, when we get back into physical spaces, or using the digital kit. These conversations can be supported. So I think just a closing comment, I think from you, Bill, you asked the question earlier about high performance and kind of the definition of it. Do you think we've made a bit of a dent in it, and which bit of the question have we answered okay, and then which other bits would people go away and think, actually, these are additional questions we could ask? Because we never say we've nailed everything. We're just offering a practical step along the way for engaging high performance colleagues. So where does that leave you?
I think the engaging bit's really interesting. We used Mike as the example. We put him into another situation. He was recognized for a completely different situation as opposed to here's Mike. It's actually looked at, by the way, we can build another team using Mike as a mentor, but at the same time, using the analogy of the base camp, what in your toolkit do you need to do to get up to the top? Because the top knows what a high performing team looks like, because when you get there, you performed. So what do we need to put in individually to get the collective up there?
Nice. And I think there's probably something around there in what then happens to Mike. Is he then promoted out of that position of high performance? And then you've got the kind of Peter principle, like is it more value to the organization having Mike where he is or as a promotion? So yeah, that's brilliant. So I think what we'll do is we'll close it there. For people watching the recording, please do get in touch, get involved. We've done a demonstration there. What we would like to do is for you to get in touch, and then what we'll do is we'll run through a demonstration with your team using the story prop, using the big picture board. We can run a demo for a number of your colleagues where we invite everybody to tell their story. We'll then listen to them. We'll take it through into the organizational context. We'll support this couplet that is between a personal perspective and an organizational context, and we'll manage that conversation throughout. And that is how we engage high performing colleagues, translated into your big pick. And thanks for watching.